Just some factual basis, Mr. Stanley and the deceased lived in the same apartment complex. Mr. Stanley lives on the 5th floor, the deceased lived on the 9th floor. He did not know the deceased. Mr. Stanley's out one day, on this particular day, just outside smoking a cigarette. The deceased comes down, they strike up a conversation, and he asks him, well, do you want to go get a drink? Mr. Stanley says yes. They go to the store, they get some cigarettes, they come back to the deceased apartment, they go to the kitchen, they're standing there drinking some wine. For whatever reason, the deceased walks out of the apartment. It's gone for, I don't know, just a short period of time. Mr. Stanley hears some glass break, and upon hearing the glass break, he walks out of the apartment, down the hall, and to the window, because the window's broken. He looks out of the window and sees that the deceased is laying on the ground. He is surrounded by 4 or 5 men that Mr. Stanley does not know. Mr. Stanley then proceeds to leave the building. He goes downstairs. He doesn't go near the person because he's surrounded by these other men, but he does go sit on a bench. He doesn't leave the vicinity at all. He just goes and sits down. The police come, and there is one individual of the 5 or 6 that are out there that says he sees Mr. Stanley push this man out of the window, which of course he didn't, because he didn't see him push him out of the window, and it was impossible because they only see the body when it falls. And very strange that nobody else sees him do this. Not only is it impossible for him to see because he didn't do it, it would be physically impossible for Mr. Stanley to do it. He had no motive to push him out of the window. Mr. Stanley, as you can see, is an elderly gentleman. The young man that is deceased was half Mr. Stanley's age, just about double his weight, and at least a foot taller than Mr. Stanley. The window that he went out of had some metal bar that kind of divided the window. Mr. Stanley would have had to literally lift him up and toss him out of the window. The state's own preliminary autopsy shows the only trauma to the deceased body was blunt force trauma when he hit the ground. There were no defensive wounds, there was no sign of struggle, also no signs of struggle on Mr. Stanley's body.
So the defendant's thought is he just jumped out the window?
He doesn't know. He just knows he walked out of that window, out of that apartment after they were just standing there having some drinks. He hears the glass break and he walks out and looks out, and there he is.
The witnesses said that the defendant told them that a male got pushed out of the window on the 9th floor. They said that the defendant he didn't appear shocked or anything. He just said, yeah, it looks like he got pushed out on the 9th floor, Your Honor, which is strange when someone just got pushed out of an apartment complex. But at any event,
He couldn't describe them or describe what he saw when the people were pushed out?
I'm sorry?
He didn't describe who he saw push the person out?
No, Your Honor, no, not to my knowledge. The defendant also was sitting there on a bench after this whole thing happened. Like I said, he didn't appear to be in shock or anything. He was just sitting there smoking a cigarette. The victim was pronounced dead on the scene. Cause of death was the fall, the blunt force trauma. The police interviewed various witnesses on scene. They met with the maintenance worker at the apartment complex. He stated that earlier that day when he was there working, he met with the deceased victim and the defendant. They were hanging out. He stated that the deceased victim was telling the defendant and him that he had just gotten a huge payday that day. He had gotten about $800 cash. We believe that played some role in this incident, Judge. Another witness stated that he saw the defendant standing over the body of the deceased victim, holding the deceased victim's wallet.